Hello, Free From an Allergy community. Welcome back to another virtual show. I am so excited to introduce a special guest today. You may know her as the gluten-free queen of cooking, which I've labeled her as because when you look at her recipes online, anyone who can make a gluten-free spanakopita, I can never pronounce that properly, is honestly a queen in my eyes. So Helen is a gluten-free cookbook author, television presenter, food photographer, and recipe developer, and is obsessed with making delicious gluten-free food from scratch for her family and friends. She loves sharing her passion for food with others and started her gluten-free food blog in 2015 as a creative outlet. Now, Helen, I'm so sorry to sound rude, but how do I pronounce your last name?
That's okay. It's Tzouganatos.
Tzouganatos.
Yes. It's a twister. It's okay.
Oh, I love it. See, my last name is Minakosi, so I always get, when people look at it on paper, it looks a lot worse than it sounds.
Yeah.
So no one can ever pronounce my name anyway. So thank you so much for coming and giving us your time today to talk to you on all things gluten-free. It's really important to us here at Free From an Allergy to spread awareness about gluten-free and celiac disease, because there's so many out there who suffer from it or suffer and don't even know about it. And there's just not enough resources and information out there. So we really want to put this show on to give our community and the public that opportunity to get those resources, connect with the people that are experts in this area and can then learn from them and gain that information. So tell me a bit more about you. How and when did your gluten-free journey start?
Well, my gluten-free journey actually started from birth, but I was unaware I was a celiac like most people until the symptoms presented. I actually had symptoms all my life of tiredness, lethargy, constant anemia. And, when I was a kid, doctors weren't proactively screening celiac disease. They weren't asking about it. They weren't proactively screening you for it. Unlike now, if a kid presents with stomach pain and low iron at a GP, the first thing they'll say is, okay, we're going to test you for celiac disease. But when I was a kid, 30 years ago, it wasn't like that. So I had all those symptoms in my life. Most people, after a long day at work, they're tired. So they're sort of common day symptoms. And it wasn't until I started to try and fall pregnant that I realized there was a problem because I was infertile. So after 3 years of trying to fall pregnant naturally, we went down the IVF path. And I went to an IVF clinic, and the first thing my IVF doctor said to me is, based on what you're telling me, you sound like you're a celiac to me. And, 10 years ago, I had never heard of the word celiac or gluten. Nobody was talking about it. This is more than a decade ago. Nobody was really talking about it. So we ran all the tests. I had an endoscopy, and it was confirmed. And, he said, you're a celiac. You need to cut gluten from your diet. Now I've got 3 kids, so there's a happy ending to the story. But, that was the cause of my infertility. So that's another way it can present. So a lot of people who were diagnosed as adults, women, quite often it's through infertility that they find out they're a celiac. So I cut gluten, and immediately, this fog and this exhaustion lifted. And, 10 years ago, there wasn't much in the market. There wasn't, you couldn't walk into a Coles or Woolworths supermarket and find gluten-free bread, flour, but they just weren't stocking those things. I had to drive to a health food store like 15 k's from my house to get 1 loaf of bread. That was horrible. So that's when I started playing around 10 years ago. I started playing around with different flours, experimenting with different recipes, and I built up my own portfolio of recipes. And I just started sharing them online about probably 6 years ago now. And it kind of grew from there, and people discovered me through Instagram. And that's kind of how I grew a following and started sharing my recipes. And people would always have questions and write to me, and it kind of all grew from there. And then the cookbook came and the television show came. It kind of all happened organically, really.
Yeah, because I couldn't imagine being Greek. It would have been challenging because even with me being Italian, it's like all our major dishes, pizza, pasta, bread, is all gluten based. So did you find that you struggled? And so that's where you decided to change the spin on the traditional Greek food?
Well, so in terms of Greek cooking, in terms of the main meals, it's okay because a lot of it's protein based with vegetables on the side. A lot of Greek cooking is, meat, seafood, and beautiful vegetables on the side. And there's a lot of vegetarian and vegan dishes in Greek cooking. But when it came to the sort of bakery items, like you said, the spanakopita, the cheese pies, the cakes, the sweets, that's where I really struggled. So for example, like my mum's got a beautiful spanakopita recipe, which is a cheese and spinach pie. So I use her filling now and with my pastry recipe that I've developed. So that's how I've been able to eat it again. So yeah, initially it was challenging, but once you get like a core pastry recipe, a good bread recipe, then you can start substituting and playing around. But in terms of pasta, yes, that would be a challenge if you're Italian. But now there's some really great, now in the market, there's a really great gluten-free pasta that you can find. 10 years ago, like I said, there wasn't. Now there's like probably 10 brands to choose from. Everyone has their own favorites. So there are many more options now.
Yeah, definitely. And where do you get your inspiration from for all your recipes?
Everywhere. So it could be, a traditional Greek recipe that my mum's taught me. We eat out a lot, so it could be at a restaurant. So in my new cookbook, Easy Gluten Free, I've got some sticky pork ribs with a honey tamari glaze. That was inspired by a dish that I had at a restaurant. But they, fried a pork knuckle and drizzled this sauce on. I thought, nobody really wants to deep fry at home. So how can we put like a healthier twist on this? So I braised the pork ribs and took those flavors and made a marinade out of them. So it's like a really nice, easy family dish that any home cook can make. So when I'm developing a recipe, I've got 3 young kids. I want my recipes to be easy and achievable and practical. Like, you can go out and have a beautiful restaurant dish, but I think, okay, who's actually going to make this at home? Or how can I turn this into a home dish, something that a home cook could make and achieve?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is, especially, I'm not myself, but I know I have a few friends and even my cousins who are pregnant or have kids. You just want that convenience, quick, easy, healthy food that's going to nourish their bodies, but not take you 3 hours to cook.
Yeah, that's right.
Management.
On a Sunday, you might want to do like a slow cooked lamb and cover it with foil and let it cook for 4 hours in the oven. But midweek, when you come home, the kids are home from school, you need something quick, easy, convenient. It can be half prepped perhaps the night before and you just finish it off when you get home from work, or you want like a quick and easy pasta dish or like a sang choy bao or a stir fry, something that's practical that kids are actually going to eat.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you go with your testing? Because I myself find gluten-free flours can be quite challenging. Do you find that you use certain gluten-free flours for sweet dishes as opposed to savory dishes and some work better?
Well, I use 2 types of flour. So I'll either use an all-purpose flour, which is a flour that you use as a sort of 1-to-1 replacement. And I have preferred brands that I use there. Now, what I should say is the quality of gluten-free sort of all-purpose flours that are in the market vary greatly. So you can get ones that will leave you with a crumbly mess and you're like, oh, the cake's just fallen apart, and then ones that will bake beautifully. So find one that you like. Obviously, price point does, dictate quality. So you can generally tell from the price point. The more expensive ones are better, unfortunately. Or you can blend your own flour. So, for example, if I'm making a high fiber buckwheat and chia loaf, I'll blend buckwheat flour with tapioca flour. I'll make my own blend. And I know that works really well in bread. And buckwheat flour and tapioca flour, now you can now find it in the supermarket. It's in every supermarket in Australia. So you blend those 2 flours and that's really great in bread because tapioca is really bouncy and springy, and buckwheat gives you those earthy qualities, and you get, a fiber injection into the bread as well that way. So I either blend flours or I'll use a really good all-purpose flour.
Wow. And just off the top of your head, what's your favorite brand for your all-purpose flour?
I have 2 favorite brands, which I've mentioned on my social media. One's an Australian brand, a local brand called Adore Gluten Free. They're based in Melbourne. They're a Melbourne-based company.
Oh.
I love to support, local manufacturers. So they are based in Melbourne. So if you live in Melbourne, you can find their flours probably in, your local corner store. But if you live outside of Melbourne, you can order online at their website, Adore Gluten Free, and you can order their flours online, and their flour is fantastic quality. The next one I like is actually an overseas brand called Bob's Red Mill, and it's the 1-to-1 plain baking flour. It's got a blue label. They have one with a red label and one with a blue label. Get the 1-to-1 with the plain blue label because the red label's got beans in it, and you don't want your cakes tasting like beans. So that's been hard. And now with COVID, it's been really hard to source. It's been really hard to find it. But I live in Sydney, so I can buy it at Harris Farm or Taste Organic, the more premium sort of retailers. But you can find it online, but just with COVID, it has been harder to find. But Adore Gluten Free from Melbourne, easy to get, especially if you live in Melbourne. If you live outside of Melbourne, just order it online. The flour's fantastic, and your cakes and biscuits and breads will turn out beautifully.
Oh, that's a good tip. Thank you. Because yeah, I find I struggle with gluten-free flour. Like you buy so many different ones at the supermarket and it's like, but it's gluten-free flour. How does it change? And it's like, there's different grades. It's like any
Yeah,
other flour.
yeah, there's different qualities because it's a gluten-free flour. They're blending to make that flour. They're blending rice flour, tapioca, maize starch. So everyone has their own blend, and some are more expensive blends than others, and the more expensive ones tend to bake better.
Well,
Like
and that, yeah. Well, that was actually going to lead into my next question I was going to ask you was when using a gluten-free flour substitute, do you suggest using a combination of flour such as buckwheat and rice? And I guess you just answer that just
if you're
depends what.
using a single flour, yeah. So if you're using a single flour, so it's tapioca flour, buckwheat flour, sorghum, rice flour, you generally need to combine those when you're baking. So if the easier option is to use a good all-purpose flour. But if you're doing something like crumbing, for example, you're making some calamari and you're crumbing, you could just use tapioca. Tapioca is great for crumbing, or rice flour because it gives you a really nice light finish, or even potato starch. If you're making like a salt and pepper calamari, potato starch gives you a crunchier finish, and tapioca flour will give you like a really light, crispy finish. So, but for baking, say a cake, for example, if you wanted to make your own flour, you would need to blend different flours together.
Yeah. Well, do you have a little trick for creating fluffy bread? Because trying to replicate the texture of bread, I've found so challenging.
Okay, I have my favorite recipe, which is like my basic go-to. It's on my blog and it's in my cookbook. So it's on HelenTzouganatos.com. It's my high fiber buckwheat and chia bread. So like I said before, I blend buckwheat and tapioca flour. They're my two flours that I use. And tapioca is great in baked bread because it gives it like a really springy, bouncy finish. And you just mix it like a cake batter. You add some eggs, some oil, some water, some chia seeds, and a little bit of xanthan gum, which you can get from supermarkets as well. So xanthan gum, just use a tiny amount because it is quite strong. It gives a bit of stretch to your baked goods, and it comes out beautifully. And it just mixes like a cake batter, and you pour it into a tin and just let it rise for an hour. It's the easiest loaf of bread to make. Easiest because you don't need to knead anything. There's no gluten to knead. And everyone who makes it goes, I can't believe how easy that was. And I'm not buying, bread from the supermarket again. Once you make it, it's so good, you won't want to buy store-bought. And it's very easy. It's something you could make a couple of times a week.
Because I found with xanthan gum, does that almost act like as gluten agent, like a binding
agent? It's mimicking gluten. So it's like, imagine like chewing gum. It's really stretchy. But you can only use a little bit because it's quite strong. So when you're using xanthan gum, a little bit goes a long way. And you'll know if you've used too much, because if you've used too much, you're going to get like gummy bits in your bread that look like chewing gum. That you want to. So just be. So, but if you follow I've got all the measurements on my website and in my book. So if you follow those, you'll be fine.
Oh, perfect.
And one thing I should say, sometimes I get requests about from people who are making the bread who are egg-free. So if you want to replace an egg substitute is flaxseed meal or chia seed meal. Mix 1 tablespoon with about 3 tablespoons of water until it goes really gluggy, and then just pour that in, and that can work as an egg substitute. I'd steer clear of the sort of processed ones you find in the supermarket. That's a great natural way to make an egg substitute.
Yes. Well, and I will pop down in this video all the links to your cookbooks and to your website as well, because I know even when I was looking at your blog, I was like, the amount of recipes on here, it's a Bible. It's literally like gluten-free Bible. Yeah,
my new book that's just come out, Easy Gluten Free, is really great for someone who's just starting because I've covered every category. Like I've got a bakery section in there with all your, basic breads and pastries and things like that. But then, I've got recipe ideas for a midweek dinner. So, like chicken and spinach meatballs. So traditionally with meatballs, you would use like a breadcrumb in the ball, but I use grated potato. It makes them really light and fluffy. So that's my sort of gluten-free tip there. So there's a lot of beautiful dinner recipes in that one. So the latest one covers everything. It's great for anyone who's new to gluten-free and who just wants sort of like a broad spectrum across different categories.
I love that. What is your gluten-free staple for cooking? Do you have one ingredient that you cannot live without?
Gluten-free staple, it probably the flours, I'd say. Like probably what do I use the most? Probably tapioca flour, because it's really versatile. So tapioca flour, I can use it to make bread. I can use it to crumb. So if I'm making crumb chicken, I'll first dust it in tapioca before I crumb. I can use it, like for frying if I fry. But I don't fry often, but if I do, I can use it in that sense. You can also use it in an air fryer. I've got an air fryer, so I air fry that a lot. You can just dust your things in an air fryer. Sorry, there is another ingredient that I do use a lot, quinoa. So quinoa, you can either use it as a flake for crumbing. You can use it as a seed, so as a replacement to pasta. If you're doing like a braised dish and you just serve it on a bed of quinoa, it soaks up the sauce. And quinoa is also great, like if you want to make a quick porridge in the morning, not so much now because it's summer, but in winter, if you want to make a nice porridge, just like a 3-minute porridge, I've got that recipe in the book and on my blog as well. Just some quinoa flakes, some milk, any milk of your choice. If you're dairy free, you can use a coconut milk or an almond milk, and you just mix it together, add a little bit of maple syrup and cinnamon, and you've got a beautiful porridge in literally 3 minutes. So quinoa flakes are great for that.
So quinoa flakes, because I've seen the quinoa grains and I've actually only just come in contact with quinoa flakes. I brought them online and I was like, oh, this is going to change my cooking.
Yeah, quinoa flakes are great because a flake is basically a pressed seed. So it cooks in a fraction of the time of the seed. So for porridge in the morning, it cooks in 3 minutes. Flakes are also great for crumbing. So if you want to make like a crumb chicken schnitzel or some crumbed fish, you can just, dip your protein in some flour, in like an egg wash, and then just crumb it with the quinoa flakes and whatever seasoning you want to add in there, salt, pepper, thyme, parmesan. You can, the world's your oyster. You can do whatever you want. But quinoa flakes are great like that.
Oh, that's definitely handy. They're super, and you can actually find them at the supermarket now.
Yes.
I saw.
Yeah, most supermarkets, all supermarkets have the seed and most have the flake too now. It's usually in the health food aisle.
Yeah. And I was going to say, so for someone who's just starting their gluten-free cooking journey, I know that a really good staple would be your latest book. Do you find, how can you really go over with the overwhelm? Because it can be quite overwhelming changing the cooking when you're cooking for kids and stuff. Do you find with your recipes though, the kids just don't even know?
No, they wouldn't. They don't. I mean, I'm the only one that cooks in my family. My husband doesn't cook, so they have to. They wouldn't know the difference. Like if I'm making lasagna or some chocolate cupcakes, they have no idea. I mean, they know it's gluten free because they know I only cook gluten free, but you can't taste the difference. Like when I'm entertaining and I have people over, they wouldn't even know that the bread that they're eating is gluten free. It just tastes like normal bread to them. They're like, oh, this tastes really yum. And if I'm making a lasagna, obviously I'll use a gluten-free lasagna sheet. So you can't really taste the difference.
And I guess like you said, it's definitely changed over time. The options out there.
And anything homemade tastes beautiful. So anything you're making from scratch, doesn't matter what is going to taste amazing because you're making it from scratch. You know exactly what's going into it. You don't have, any artificial additives and preservatives, and it's always going to taste better when it's made from scratch.
Definitely. I always used to say, and I still say it, anything made from scratch, especially whenever you go to Nonna's, it always tastes amazing. Yeah. Because there's love in it. There's a lot of love and nurture and care into it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're going to, if you're making something from scratch, then you're going to use, good quality extra virgin olive oil. You're not going to take shortcuts. So it's always going to taste better.
What would have to be your favorite recipe?
Like a savory or a sweet recipe?
Ooh, well, how about we go one of each? Your favorite savory?
I've got a sweet tooth, so I'm going to say my favorite go-to for cookies is my new book is a cookie recipe because I can't believe there's no butter chocolate chip cookies and they're gluten and dairy free. I get lots of requests for dairy free food, so I run a little survey on my own website and said, okay, how many of you who are gluten free also eat dairy free? And at least 50% don't eat dairy at all or minimize it. So there's a huge correlation there in terms of gluten-free and dairy-free. So I developed a cookie recipe and I make it with coconut oil. So coconut oil is a great substitute for butter in cookies, and it also makes them really crispy and it gives them a bit of a chew, which is nice too. So I make it with coconut oil, gluten-free flour, 70% dark chocolate chips, so they're dairy-free, and they are absolutely delicious. Really easy cookie recipe. And you could even make the dough and roll them and store them in the freezer if you want to make a big batch and bake some for later. So the cookie recipe is probably my favorite sweet recipe because I love cookies. And in terms of savory, one savory dish that's my favorite. I really love the meatballs because I love pasta. So the pork and the meatballs, which I also made on my show, Loving Gluten Free. So it's a combination of pork, veal, and sage. And like I said, instead of using a breadcrumb, I finely grate a potato, very finely grate and squeeze out the moisture and use one large potato. I add that to the meatball mixture and it makes them super light and fluffy. You don't want a dense meatball. If there's no starchy component in there, the meatball will come out dense. So, you know, instead of using a breadcrumb, you can use a potato and they taste delicious.
Oh, and I guess it's really important to make sure you squeeze out that potato juice though.
Yes. Yes. I've actually got a demonstration because I did that one on Loving Gluten Free. I've got the recipe. There's a video demo on my website. And yeah, and you can get it. There's a typed version as well.
Yeah, because I found like even I was making a gluten-free zucchini loaf the other day, and rookie error with me, I didn't actually like take out the water from the zucchini.
That would have been
So it just didn't cook or anything. It just sort of went, and I was like, oh, it's because it was gluten-free. And I rang up my nonna because she's a cooking queen as well. And I was like, Nonna, why didn't it work? And she goes, well, did you make sure you squeezed out the zucchini? Because there's a lot of water, density in there. And I was like, wait, what? She goes, yes, any of those stuff. She's like, you need to take out that water. Otherwise, you need to cater for that and add the different measurements for your different alternative flours you pop in.
Yeah, that's right. You definitely need to squeeze out the water. That your food's going to be waterlogged. Squeeze firmly. So try and get as much moisture out as you possibly can. And the great one with zucchini to help release that water, you can add a pinch of salt as well, and it'll help release the excess moisture.
Yeah, beautiful. I guess I only have a few more questions. One I actually wanted to ask you was, do you use a lot of nut flours in your cooking?
Yeah, I do. I cook a lot with almond meal, hazelnut meal. Like the great thing with nut flours is you can like substitute them for each other, which is great. And I mean, hazelnut meal, you get a bit of a nuttier, earthier taste. Almond meal is quite mild, like you wouldn't even know you're eating a nut meal. Now, I also get a lot of questions from people who have nut allergies. So what do I do if I've got a nut allergy? They can use a seed meal. Sunflower seed meal is beautiful. Yeah, sunflower seed, pepitas, beautiful in baked goods. They give you a really nice crispy finish. So if you've got a nut allergy, you can use sunflower seed butter or sesame seed butters, or you can use or the flour from the seed instead of a nut. Nut flours are great. And also the great thing about nut flours is that they're low carb. So people who are watching their carb intake, you know, whether if they're diabetic or just, you know, trying to lose some weight, their nut flours are great in terms of keeping your carb count really low on your food.
Yeah. And then my last question for you, it's going to actually go back to the pastry. Yes. When you are doing your pastries, can you over knead them when you're using
it? Because gluten-free pastry, like I said, of all the sort of cooking techniques, pastry is the most daunting and probably the most challenging, even for anyone, even if they're not gluten-free. So gluten-free adds another, you know, element to it, which makes it even more of a challenge. What I do is I roll it between 2 sheets of baking paper because the dough is very delicate. Grab a sheet of baking paper, put your dough on top, place another sheet of baking paper on top, and then use your rolling pin to roll it out. Otherwise, it sticks everywhere and it falls apart. So 2 sheets of baking paper is my tip for pastry. You get it really fine and super thin because you want that pastry to be nice and thin. Otherwise, it's going to be too sort of gluggy. So lots of baking paper is my tip.
Perfect. Well, that's all I had for you today. If anyone wants to find you, I know we've said it before, but do you just want to say it again, how we can find you?
So I'm, in terms of social media, Instagram and Facebook. So Helen Tzouganatos. So it's Tzouganatos. It is a mouthful, but once you find me, type it again. And I also have a blog, HelenTzouganatos.com, which I've got a lot of recipes on as well. And there's a link on that blog to the videos from my show Loving Gluten Free. All the recipe videos are on there via a link, and you can, if you're looking for meatballs or banana bread, you can find recipe demonstrations on there as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, Helen. We really do appreciate it. And if you haven't already, please check out her blog. Honestly, the recipes there are phenomenal. And if you are just new to your gluten-free journey, you don't need to be worried about it because there's so many recipes out there. And her latest book is a really good starter for you to get intact and really test out your chef skills, because anyone can cook. Just follow your recipes and you'll be fine.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Helen.
Thanks. Bye.